Good morning, divas and dudes. My name is Jerrica, and of course we are going to be getting into part 2 of Fueling for Performance. Now, previously on our segment, Divas and Dudes with Jerrica, we covered a few topics. We did a recap of energy balance. We also went ahead and went through why we exercise, the benefits of exercise, the types of exercise as well. And getting into our recap, what was exercise and what distinguished it from physical activity? I know y'all didn't think y'all were gonna get pop quiz this early, huh?
I think it's to raise your heart rate.
Okay, that was one of the reasons why, right? So one of the forms of exercise is cardio, right? So resistance training was one of the other forms of exercise, yes. But what is exercise in general? So those are great types of exercise. What is exercise?
Moving.
There you go, okay. So exercise is that subset of physical activity. So remember, physical activity is this umbrella term that encompasses all different forms of movement. Exercise is simply a subgroup of physical activity. It's a little bit more specific, it's planned, it's structured, it's repetitive. That's the key word right there. And it typically has a final objective. We're typically doing this for a reason such as raising our heart rate or trying to increase lean muscle mass. We then talked about the benefits of exercise. We talked about how exercise, it can increase our bone density by stimulating bone regeneration, which ultimately helps reduce our risk of osteoporosis and osteopenia. It can promote lean muscle mass through 3 different mechanisms that can promote hypertrophy, so muscle growth. We can also see that exercise allows for us to have better hormonal regulation, such as improvements in anxiety, depression, and of course, mood. We can also see that it reduces our risk for neurodegenerative diseases. So exercise can significantly reduce our risk for Alzheimer's, dementia, and I believe too there's research coming out that it can help with schizophrenia. We can also see that it reduces our risk for chronic disease. Exercise is a prescription now for reducing inflammation in the body, and we know that inflammation is the root cause for almost all chronic disease. Okay, now this is where we were getting into the types of exercise. Do we remember how many different types of exercise there were? 4, beautiful. And then we listed off the first 2. We said there was cardio, we said there was strength training, and there were 2 other ones. Do you remember what they were? Balance and flexibility, perfect. I know, right? And then we talked about, is one necessarily better than the other? Is one form of exercise better than the other?
Isn't the resistance one?
Well, for a certain objective, it can. And we can't necessarily say better, it's just more effective at achieving a certain goal, right? But the reason we can't say that one is necessarily better than the other is because remember, each form of exercise has a very specific role, right? We need cardio to help improve our overall cardiovascular health. We need it to help with our blood pressure, our resting heart rate. We need strength and resistance training for lean muscle mass growth and maintenance and bone generation. We need flexibility so that we can prevent our risk of falls. We need flexibility to be able to move through our full range of motion. And then we need balance so that we can remain still while in motion. So technically all forms of exercise have their own purpose, which is why we can't say that one is necessarily better than the other. Because also we have to consider that technically in untrained populations, right, so individuals who may not exercise as much, all forms of these exercise can induce the 3 mechanisms needed for lean muscle mass growth. So if you recall, we talked about mechanical tension. So that mechanical tension is the force that we're applying across our muscles when we're lifting something heavy. So that stretch that you feel in your muscles. We talked about muscle damage, which is where we get these little microscopic tears in our muscles that results in soreness. And then we also have metabolic stress, which if you remember, that's when our cells get full of all these metabolites, and then water comes rushing in. And then we get that beautiful and glorious little pump where everything's poking and like sinking in all the right places and everything looks great. So technically, all forms of exercise can induce lean muscle mass growth. Technically. However, if we do not have, well, let's back up. With muscle adaptation, do you remember why muscle adaptation is important? Why do we need our body to be able to adapt? Why do you think in general it's important that our body adapts? Not even just to exercise, but adapts to stressors, adapts to environment. Why is it important that our body does that? Stay healthy.
Prevent injuries.
Prevent injuries. Why is it important that our body adapts? Prevent injury, stay healthy.
To protect your body.
To protect the body. So that we ultimately don't die. That's why adaptation is important. We need our body to be able to adapt, but we also need our muscles to adapt. So with any form of exercise that we implement, there will be a form of muscle adaptation, which is important. We need our muscles adapt so that when we go to lift something, we're not tearing a muscle. We need muscle adaptation so when we're bending down, all of a sudden our ACL isn't ripping or our meniscus isn't tearing. So we need that muscle adaptation. However, this is where if we do not have a form of exercise in which we are gradually intensifying that repetitive exercise, this is where we can see muscle plateaus, which is why sometimes we can start noticing when it comes to our weight management, weight loss, or weight gain journey, that we kind of stop. What once was working for us now seems like it's no longer working for us. It's not that that exercise is wrong, it's just that your body has adapted to it. And so that's why when it comes to lean muscle mass growth, we can go ahead and see that what form of exercise is actually the most beneficial for lean muscle mass growth. Which one? Cardio, you said what?
Strength.
Beautiful. Okay. Now, this is where, one, in order to be able to gradually intensify, right, especially when our muscles are adapting, we need adequate energy and proper recovery to actually train. Keyword, consistently. We also require energy and proper recovery to continue intensifying our exercise. Keyword, consistently. Bless you. Now, this is where we're going to go ahead and continue today's conversation. We're going to get into exercise nutrition because this is going to look a little bit different compared to what you may have heard of before. And we're also going to get into the consequences of underfueling. And with that being said, welcome to part 2, Divas and Dudes. All right, everyone. Now, when we get into nutrition for performance, today we are going to be covering hydration, what we can consume pre-workout, what we can consume during a workout, and ideally what we're consuming following a workout. Now getting into hydration. Ideally, before we're training, we're taking in anywhere between 6 to 10 fluid ounces 10 to 20 minutes before we're actually exercising. And ideally, anywhere from 16 to 24 fluid ounces 2 to 3 hours before training. So for example, 10 to 20 minutes before training, you can just begin to sip on one of these little bottles essentially. 2 to 3 hours before, we're looking for about 16 to 24 fluid ounces. And this is just to ensure that we have proper blood flow going into our training session. We also want to make sure that before going into our training session, we have proper blood flow, but we also have enough blood volume to make sure that oxygen can get to our brain and our muscles, electrolytes can get to our organs and tissues, and we can prevent any overheating as well. During, if we are exercising, well, one, if we're properly fueled and going into our training session well hydrated, you may only need water for any activity that lasts less than an hour. Whereas any exercise that lasts over an hour, or we are in high heat, hello Texas, this is where we want water with electrolytes during our training. And then of course, after, this is where you can do anywhere from 16 to 24 fluid ounces of water for every 1 pound that you lose. So for example, let's say, I'll use my weight this last time. So I went into the gym, I was around 182. I left the gym, I was 180. How many ounces of water would you recommend that I consume if I lost 2 pounds? What did we say?
At least 32 ounces.
There we go, at least 32 fluid ounces. Did I? No, but that would have definitely helped my recovery process. So this is where weighing yourself going into a training session and weighing yourself after a training session can be really valuable to actually ensure that you're getting in the fluids that you need. So roughly for every pound that you lose, we're looking for 16 to 24 fluid ounces of water. Now, why? Well, we need water before, during, and even after for a few very important things. By having water within our body, we can actually regulate our body temperature. And making sure that we're not overheating, we can actually kind of shunt that energy that our body would spend just trying to regulate body temperature into actually being able to perform and feel good during our training session. We can also see that adequate hydration maintains our blood volume. It improves nutrient delivery. It enhances focus, and it can even optimize muscle recovery after a training session. Questions, comments, concerns so far? Okay. How are we feeling with the recap of what we talked about and then hydration so far? Beautiful. Okay. Now this is where we're getting into pre-workout nutrition. What are some of our thoughts about eating before going into a workout? Or what are some things we've heard?
In the past, it was carb loading.
Okay, carb loading. Carb loading is a very specific technique. When have you heard carb loading before? Like in what context?
Runners.
And
Bodybuilders.
so we've heard it for bodybuilders, because also too, like bodybuilders, what will happen is they'll go like into a strict deficit. So they will eliminate all carbohydrates. So when they go into their carb loading actually helps for like water retention. So you can get a little bit more plump, essentially. We can also see it in terms of running, right? So carb loading is where you can consume, before an event, you can consume anywhere from like 8 to 10 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of your body weight. So for some individuals, that looks like 700 grams of carbohydrate each day for 3 days before an event. So that's a little bit more specific, like especially with a large event. What have we heard about fueling when it comes to a general workout? Gatorade, okay. What else? Protein shakes. What else? What are some ideas we've had or heard about? Okay, so really prioritizing protein going into it. Okay. So before, we're ideally having something around 2 to 3 hours before we actually train. And this is where we get into some of our macronutrients. Hey, flashback. So ideally with our meal about 2 to 3 hours before, we're looking for a nice combination of carbohydrates and protein. We can have a little bit of fat depending on like someone's tolerance. And we're also looking for a little bit of fiber. Why do you think this is? Why we're prioritizing carbs and protein and not as much fat or fiber before a workout?
Fruit.
So energy, so fruit's gonna be a carbohydrate, that's perfect. Think digestion.
That halts when you're exercising too.
There you go. So what happens is when we're exercising, right, our fight or flight nervous system is activated. So our body's under stress. Even though exercise is fantastic for our body recognizes it as almost like you're running from a lion, basically. And if you're running from a lion, do you think that's gonna be the best time for your body to be like, oh my gosh, let's eat? No. Do you think that's gonna be the best time for your body to be like, oh my gosh, let's take a nap? No, because you're running from a lion, you're stressed. So what happens is when any type of stressor is present, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, financial, spiritual, any time a stressor is present, that fight or flight, the sympathetic nervous system is activated, and blood flow actually shunts away from the digestive tract so that blood flow can be shunted towards the essential organs and tissues. With that being said, digestion is slowed. And if you remember, how do fat and fiber digest? Do they digest quickly or slowly? Slowly. So if I'm going into a workout with nutrients in my stomach, do you think that's going to feel very comfortable for me? Probably not. So that's why 2 to 3 hours before, we're looking for carbohydrates, we're looking for protein, but we're also wanting to be mindful of our fat and fiber. But let's say you're training early in the morning. I don't know about you, but I'm not waking up at 5 a.m. If I'm training at 8, that's not happening. And I also don't train in the morning because I'm not waking up that early. That's not happening either. I'm not, my sister is, but that is not me. So in the case that we have no meal, that's not even a problem. This is where about 30 minutes before, you can have a quick digesting carbohydrate. So something that's very easy to digest, anywhere between 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate, depending on what your body's needs are. Any questions? That's a great question. We're gonna get into it. So during performance, one, how many grams of carbohydrate we're looking for depends on, I can't say just 2 factors, but it's highly influenced by 2 factors. We're looking at the duration and we're also looking at the intensity. So ideally, we're starting fueled. Whether that's a meal 2 to 3 hours before, whether that's a bulked up snack 2 to 3 hours before, or even if it's a quick digesting carbohydrate around 30 minutes before. Perfect. Now getting into that quick digesting carbohydrate real quick. This is where we are looking for carbohydrates that can really digest within 15 minutes. So these are going to be things that are typically lower fiber, low protein, and low fat. This is when we really want a carbohydrate by itself. So for example, things like, let's think of it this way. Let's say I have a sensitive stomach. Would you recommend that I eat potatoes 30 minutes before? No. Or Skittles? Should I do?
If those are really your choices, I would go with Skittles.
Amazing. Okay, that's how quick we're talking. If we're looking for, let's say for example, I'm going into a workout and I haven't eaten anything in the last 4 hours. Let's say I just woke up after an 8-hour sleep. I'm going into an hour and a half workout or an hour workout. Should I get a Powerade Zero or a regular Powerade? Regular Powerade, perfect. So this is how quick digesting we're talking. We're talking gummy candies, we're talking applesauce, we're talking mandarin oranges, we're talking juice. Typically, all of the carbohydrate foods that we're advised against, we're looking for because we need something that can easily digest without causing any tummy issues, but we're also looking for a quick digesting nutrient. Any questions regarding that? We feel good with it so far? Okay, perfect. Now, this is where we're gonna get into during a little bit. If we are fueling appropriately, so if I've had a snack 30 minutes before, if I've had a meal 2 to 3 hours before, exercise that's lasting about 45 minutes or less, we may not actually need anything during. However, if it is lasting anywhere from about an hour to around 2 hours, anywhere from light to very hard, this is where we're looking for about 30 grams of carbohydrate. Now, when I say 30 grams of carbohydrate, that doesn't mean, oh my gosh, I weighed out this slice of toast and it's 30 grams. No, I'm simply talking about what's on the nutrition label. So for example, when you mentioned Gatorade, those mini Gatorades, those have about 22 grams of carbohydrate. That's fantastic. An applesauce will usually have 17 grams of carbohydrate. A serving of Nerds clusters, so good. Those are gonna be around 25 to 30 grams of carbohydrate. So it's really just dependent on the serving size. But in the case that exercise is lasting anywhere from an hour to 2 hours, any type of intensity, we're looking for at least 30 grams of carbohydrate per hour. So to your running point, for an individual who's going on a longer run or who's participating in a half marathon or even a full marathon, this is where, for example, I know someone who was doing a half marathon and they were anticipating their time to be anywhere from 2 to 2.5 hours. So for them, they were going to be striving, since it's hard to very hard, for around 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour that they were actually performing. Whereas their mentor, who was doing a full marathon, their full marathon, they were anticipating anywhere from 3 to 4 hours. So they were actually going for 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour. So that's constant fuel that we're kind of topping off of. But of course, the amount that we're striving for varies depending on the duration, but also the intensity.
Is that snacking while exercising?
Mm-hmm. Eating while fueling, essentially. So this is where those quick digesting carbohydrates come into play. But also too, for individuals that begin to train their stomach to tolerate food while they train, this is where you'll also start seeing people begin to incorporate protein during their training as well. But this more specifically is regarding carbohydrates. Questions, comments, concerns, or thoughts about this so far? Is this challenging so far? Anything that we've heard about before or things that we may have practiced before? Okay. You're like,
well, no, I like juice, all the things that I thought you shouldn't do.
Oh, yeah. And that goes back to some of our conversation the first time we spoke, when we talked about energy balance coming in and out, how there's typically moralities assigned to foods where we look at a food and we're like, oh no, that's good and that's bad, or that's healthy and that's not healthy. When really it just comes down to the molecule. That's essentially what it is. So things like gummies, things like juices, those can be fantastic ways to be able to incorporate those fuel for your body without putting any additional stress on your body. And then of course we have some pop quiz things too later today, but let me not get ahead of myself. Okay, so following our workout, there was once this theory known as the anabolic window of opportunity. Have any of us heard about this? Okay, do you mind sharing with the class about what the anabolic window of opportunity is?
No.
Okay, true. You're like, has anybody heard of like what the window of opportunity is? Okay, so the anabolic window of opportunity was this theory that you have around a 30 to 60 minute window after eating to optimize muscle recovery. That you have to eat within 30 to 60 minutes.
And how much?
So that's a great point. It was anywhere between, so it was depending on what your goals were, it could be anywhere from a 3-to-1 ratio of carbohydrates to protein. How you would calculate protein would be around 0.26 grams of protein per kilogram of your body weight. So for example, if I were to take my weight, 180, and I divide it by 2.2, for protein within those 30 to 60 minutes after a workout, the theory was, okay, I have to get in 21 grams of protein. Because if I don't, then I'm going to see muscle loss.
Well,
And
how much is 21 grams?
so 21 grams could be traditionally like a protein shake.
Okay.
Or it could be, if we're thinking in terms of like chicken, that could be like a small, like hand size. It could
Or
be,
an egg or something?
so an egg is only 7 grams of protein. So I'd have to eat 3.
Okay.
If I wanted to do milk, like a cup of milk, I'd have to do around 3 cups of milk. So quite a lot of volume.
Yeah.
30 to 60 minutes after a workout. And that's just the protein. I'd also need carbs. So if I wanted to maximize my lean muscle mass growth, I need 3 grams of carb for every 1 gram of protein. So in this thinking, 30 to 60 minutes following a workout, I would need 60 grams of carbohydrate with 20 grams of protein. Mm-hmm.
Is there any foods that you would recommend that are high in protein but lower in volume?
Yes. So actually, depending on tolerance, Mootopia milk and Fairlife milk, those are higher protein lactose-free milk. So for 1 cup, you get 13 grams of protein. There's also what's known as Oikos Pro. They're like these 7 fluid ounce drinks, 23 grams of protein. Dairy is usually going to be the best option when it comes to higher protein, lower volume. The great thing now is that the market is evolving because individuals are becoming a little bit more health forward. Can I say it's necessarily the healthiest way of being health forward? No, but we can use it to our advantage because now there's more products coming out that can help you maximize your protein without actually having to take in a lot. Did I answer your question? Okay, perfect. Now, the thing about the anabolic window of opportunity is that there's actually research to show that it may not be as valid as we once thought. Because this anabolic window of opportunity was based on a hypothesis that assumed that training was being carried out in a fasted state. So this anabolic window of opportunity was just already considering, okay, anyone going into training has not fueled whatsoever. And so this is where we're finding that timing of what we're consuming following a workout can actually be variable. Typically, with a fasted workout, like if I'm going into a workout with nothing in my system except maybe water, this is where, yeah, ideally we want to top off our body and put into circulation carbohydrates and protein as soon as we can. The reason we're just wanting to put it into circulation is so that now our blood is able to deliver those carbohydrates and protein to initiate recovery. Now, of course, if we're going into a workout with some sort of fuel, right? Maybe before or even during, right? This is where recovery with carbohydrates and protein may not need to be as immediate. Because essentially all we're trying to do is to put nutrients into circulation so that it's available to our muscles and to our body. That's it. So now the hypothesis and the theory is that daily intake actually supersedes timing. When I say that, daily intake can be more beneficial than the exact timing of what you're eating. How are we interpreting that?
Timing the amount of time that you're working out?
Timing like the anabolic window of opportunity. Like, okay, like I have to get in a post-workout meal 30 to 60 minutes after I work out.
Well,
That you're.
based on what you said earlier, that we should eat before we go.
Not everybody does that though. I fast before I work out,
Mm-hmm.
so my window's a little bit closer after a workout than it would be like for somebody who eats ahead and then eats a little bit like throughout. I'm not a runner, so obviously I'm not doing that, stopping at the water station to get the Kit Kat bar or whatever they have. So that person would have a longer time after a workout to get that window. Mine is closer to when I work out because I fast. Theirs is a little bit longer out because they ate throughout.
Right. So that's a perfect example of timing, right? Now, of course, when we talk about timing as well, we had before, and I've even had clients do this, they are so strict about, okay, I need to get in this post-workout meal 30 to 60 minutes after my workout. And yet, by the end of their day, they've only consumed maybe a third of their protein goals, a third of their carbohydrate intake goals. Now, with that being said, even though they got in the perfect meal 30 to 60 minutes following their workout, if they're not meeting what their body actually needs in a day, do you think they're going to put themselves in the greatest position for lean muscle mass growth? Probably not. Do you think they're going to be giving their body what it needs in order to recover well and be able to go into your training session and be able to push more and pull more and maintain the intensity? No. So that's why we're finding that daily intake may actually supersede the specific timing. Any questions regarding that? Do we want an example real quick? Okay, perfect. So we will use me. Okay, so I am 5'7", even though I give 5'10" energy. I am 27 years old. I'll be 28, even though I look 24. And I weigh 180 pounds. So for me to maintain this current weight, I would need around 2,400 calories a day. Oh, I also train like 4 times a week. Cool. For me to maintain my current weight, I'd need 2,400 calories a day. Of those 2,400 calories, for muscle growth, I'd need around 247 grams of carbohydrate a day. If we're to put that in terms of tortillas, that is 14 and a half tortillas.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. I would also need 154 grams of protein. So if we were to put that in terms of cups of Mutopia milk, I would need 12 cups of milk a day of Mutopia to maintain and promote lean muscle mass growth. And I need to stay around 66 grams of fat a day. Perfect. Let's say I'm only eating 2 times in a day. Do you think that's going to give me enough opportunity maybe to meet all of that food?
Sure, you can intermittent fast and still eat that.
You can.
You just gotta have a balance when you do it, that's all.
You have to have a balance, but also this is where with intermittent fasting, yeah, technically if I were to have one meal with all of that food, I can still put myself in a position to gain lean muscle. Even if I were to only have 4 hours in the day, and that can be more restrictive like with intermittent fasting, right? And everyone's fast is gonna be different. But let's say my eating window is only 4 hours in a day. Yeah, technically, I could still get in that food and I'd be fine. Realistically though, and behaviorally, do you think that's gonna give me enough time to get in my nutrients that I need?
I would use more than 4 hours, I need 6 or 8.
Oh yeah, that's fine too. Yeah. Some individuals will do anywhere from like 4 hours to a 12-hour window period, and it just depends. And technically, yeah, even if you were to just have 1 or 2 meals in a day, you could still meet your goals. However, we also have to think about volume. We have to think about, realistically, we have to think about what we can tolerate. For example, my sister, she's 25, and she has a constricted esophagus genetically. She has to get it dilated. So if she were to she actually needs close to my energy needs as well. She can't eat too much at one time because she gets severe heartburn. Her heart rate is also so low, so because she has to focus so much on chewing, there are times where she forgets to breathe and she passes out. So for her, if she were to only eat maybe 2 times a day, that is not enough at all for her to get what she needs in.
Does she do protein drinks or anything of that sort?
Yes, but liquids too sometimes, like because they can take up space in your stomach.
My sister's like that, so.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So sometimes for her, like if she takes up too much volume, she can, while she's eating, she can unintentionally displace other nutrients because now she's getting full off of volume. And so then she doesn't get hungry. So for her, she needs to eat around every 3 hours, and she'll start eating around 5 a.m. and she'll end around like 9 p.m. But that works for her. At the end of the day though, that's where we're just talking about daily intake. We're wanting to make sure that we're getting close to what our body needs to actually promote lean muscle mass growth and recovery. Any questions regarding that? Mm-hmm.
I have a question.
Yes.
You mentioned that she stops, as your sister, for your example, she stops eating at 9, in the scenario you gave.
Mm-hmm.
What is the rationale of not eating late in the evening after a certain time?
Yes. Okay, this is also something I'm working on. I'm repeating the question back into the mic, guys. Progress. So we had a question regarding the reasoning behind not eating after a certain time. And oh my gosh, I hate giving this answer. It depends. I feel like that's what I say all the time as a dietitian. In regard to not eating past a certain time, so the more traditional idea of intermittent fasting, that is usually to help someone achieve a caloric deficit. So for example, let's say and this is in regards to like non-religious practices, right? So this excludes Ramadan, it excludes like any practices associated with any other religion, right? Specifically more so for the sometimes blood sugar aspect of it or even weight loss aspect of it. Let's say every night at 10 p.m. I have ice cream. And I know for me, I go for Ben & Jerry's because it's so good. And I'm not doing just the 2/3 cup, I'm doing the whole pint, personally. That's around 1,200 calories, so 1,200. So let's say I'm like, you know what? No, I'm not going to eat past 9 p.m. My last meal's at 8:30. Do you think I'm gonna have that ice cream that I would usually have at 10 p.m. if I stop eating at 9? Probably not. So now I'm already in a 1,200 calorie deficit. That puts me on track to lose 2 pounds a week if I were to keep that up for 7 days. So in terms of the weight loss aspect of it, intermittent fasting has traditionally been used to help us achieve a caloric deficit because now we're not usually eating as many meals. So in the short term, there has been research to show that intermittent fasting can help with weight loss. Doesn't guarantee fat or muscle. It doesn't guarantee fat loss. It doesn't guarantee muscle gain, but in general weight loss, wherever that weight's coming from. Over time though, with adaptation, that's where we can notice even with intermittent fasting, we can plateau. Like it stops working after a minute. So technically, once again, daily intake can supersede timing. So technically, I could eat at 11 p.m. and still lose weight. That's actually what I do. I usually have a bedtime snack at around like 11:30 p.m. because I go to bed at midnight. I know I'm working on it, I know. Or sometimes I'll have something even at like 11:50 and I've been able to drop my body fat by 4%. So daily intake more so is beneficial than timing. However, for some individuals with pre-existing conditions, the reason not eating late can be beneficial is so that you have less content in your stomach when you go to bed. So for example, like using the case of my sister, because she has a little bit more of like that constricted esophagus, and I wanna say her little sphincter that separates her esophagus from her stomach is like, it's a little loose, I wanna say. When she lays down and she has those contents in her stomach, now it's kind of pushing up against her sphincter, so she experiences that heartburn. Whereas me, I don't experience that. I can eat literally 5 minutes before bed and I'm not feeling anything. So that's where sometimes not eating as late can be beneficial for some individuals. Did I answer your question? Okay, perfect. All right, now for time, just real quick, post-workout, we're optimizing carbohydrates and protein for a few reasons. We need carbohydrate to help us replenish what's known as glycogen. So glycogen is a short-term storage form of glucose that exists in our muscles and that exists in our liver. Our body's primary goal is to maintain blood sugar. Because if we're not maintaining blood sugar, if it drops too low, see ya, like we're gone. Bye, have a good time, you know? So our body's main goal is to replenish our blood sugar, and we're gonna do that by prioritizing our glycogen. Then of course, we want that protein to help us stimulate muscle protein synthesis. So it takes two. We need carbohydrates, but we need carbohydrates for glycogen replenishment, but also we need it so that we can shunt our protein to actually rebuilding our muscle. Now, fun fact, recovery can last anywhere from 24 to 72 hours after we exercise. Meaning that if we're training 4 times a week, every other day, we can theoretically always be in recovery. Which is why fueling for performance is a lifestyle. Because our bodies, depending on how often we train, depending on how much we train, our bodies are always in recovery and needing a sufficient amount of carbohydrates and protein and vitamins and minerals and fiber. Now, there are a few consequences of not consuming enough. And this is where if we are not consuming enough calories from carbohydrates and protein, we can actually enter a state of low energy availability. Low energy availability is where we have a limited energy availability to actually support our normal bodily functions. And so of course, once we're done with exercise, if we're not consuming enough, our body won't even have enough to perform sometimes the most basic functions that our body needs for our heart health, for our lung health, for maintaining and regulating blood sugar. And we have seen that low energy availability, so constantly being in a state where we are under fueling, has been shown to impact normal metabolism, our endocrine and physiological processes as well. And so going back to what we talked about at our first chat, there comes a point in time where even as a dietitian, I don't like manipulating intake anymore. Because by constantly lowering someone's calorie needs, I can unintentionally put them in a state of low energy availability. And when we are in a chronic stage of low energy availability, this is where we can unfortunately experience what's known as REDS, relative energy deficiency in sport or activity. Once again, this is a consequence of chronic low energy availability, and this is a syndrome of where we have poor health and overall declining athletic performance. Now, some other consequences of underfueling. So once again, when we're in this chronic state of not consuming enough calories, we can experience fatigue, training plateaus. We can experience lean muscle mass plateaus and even muscle loss. We can see a higher risk of injury, illness, and sickness. We can see changes in our mood, higher irritability, and higher rates of depression. We can also see vitamin and mineral deficiencies, poor focus and concentration, hair loss. We can see changes to our gut microbiome. We can see increased bloating, constipation, and negative hormonal changes as well. All from not eating enough. Now, quick recap. What are the 4 types of exercise? Cardio, strength. So strength and resistance are the same. Flexibility and balance. Perfect. When is electrolyte supplementation recommended during exercise?
Before.
Potentially, yeah. You could do before, but during exercise. What are the... So that was the carbohydrates, right? So the intensity and the duration can influence carb intake. Electrolytes, though, will usually be recommended when exercise exceeds how long?
Over an hour.
Over an hour, perfect. But of course, there are always going to be exceptions, right? So if we perhaps, we live in Texas, just by going outside you're starting to sweat and losing electrolytes. We can lose electrolytes through our urine as well. So there's going to be some varying extents there. Ideally, when should we have our last meal or snack before training? Ideally. Which one?
2 to 3 hours.
Amazing. So ideally, we're having 2 to 3 hours before. Now, this is where I want y'all to test me, basically. So let's say I have a high intensity strength training session in 30 minutes. My last meal was 4 hours ago. What would you recommend that I have going into this training session? It's amazing, perfect. What should I fuel with then if I'm going on a run and it's anticipated to be 1 hour and 15 minutes? There we go. Hey, our Skittles. Now, of course, once again, this anabolic window is this idea that 30 to 60 minutes after exercise, I have to get something into my body. But is it absolutely necessary to refuel within this window? No. Because once again, we are finding that daily intake over time can actually be more conducive for lean muscle mass growth and recovery. All right, guys. Now, before we get going, actually, let me say bye to everyone at home. Thank y'all so much for making time for me today. And then, of course, I will see y'all next weekend, next Saturday. And thank you so much. All right.